Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the KDPG Sunday edition. I'm Ken Rice. So what are the odds that you'll be able to legally place bets on sporting events in Pennsylvania? Well, they look pretty good. This past week, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned a federal law that had prevented sports betting in most states. We begin this morning with Mola Lengi and more on how the ruling could affect places like Pennsylvania.
Scores on the field could soon be leading to bigger paydays off the field after the Supreme Court opened the door to expand legal betting on sports. Monday, the court struck down the 1992 Professional Sports and Amateur Protection Act that barred sports gambling nearly every place but Nevada. Writing for the court, Justice Samuel Alito said Congress can regulate sports gambling directly, but if it elects not to do so, each state is free to act on its own. The case started in New Jersey, which has been fighting to legalize sports betting.
We could have bets being taken in New Jersey within 2 weeks of a decision by the court.
18 other states supported New Jersey in the lawsuit, showing there could be a rush to join in legalized gambling.
Over the course of the next couple of years, you're probably going to see 40 of sports betting.
Sarah Slane represents the American Gaming Association. She says Americans wagered $10 billion on this year's NCAA men's basketball tournament alone, with just 3% of its bets placed legally in Nevada.
People were betting offshore, no consumer protections in place. Again, we're not sure how many bookies people were working with, but there was clearly a huge demand to see this happen.
The NCAA, the NFL, Major League Baseball, and other sports leagues wanted the law upheld, arguing it protected the integrity of the games. They're calling on Congress to pass new laws regulating gambling nationwide. Mola Lengi, CBS News, the Supreme Court.
This morning, we'll examine this topic that has been controversial for many years. When could legalized sports betting take place in Pennsylvania? What kind of regulations might we see? In a few minutes, we'll hear from Chuck Berry, adjunct professor at Point Park University's Rowland School of Business. But right now, we welcome State Senator Jay Costa of Forest Hills, the Senate's Democratic leader. Last year, thinking ahead, state lawmakers passed legislation that allows licensed casinos to apply for a sports betting license. Also with us, former State Senator Sean Logan of Monroeville, who now serves as a member of Pennsylvania's Gaming Control Board. David Tribben is away this week. John Allison, editorial page editor of the Post-Gazette, is joining us. John, always nice to have you here. Welcome to both of you. So how soon are we talking? Chris Christie at one point was saying within 2 weeks in New Jersey. Senator Costa, how soon are we going to see it in Pennsylvania?
It's not going to happen in 2 weeks. We've got to be cautious about the process. There's a lot of work that has to be done by the Gaming Board, Gaming Control Board. I've been telling folks I'm hopeful that we can have a number of these casinos operating sports betting parlors and the like January 1st.
And even Christie has backed off
and that's correct.
Couple of weeks. Okay, so the legislation was passed saying that should this become legal, which it just has, we're going to have a framework in place. Now it's up to the Gaming Control Board to make the rules, right? Yes. You guys didn't do any of that work in advance the way the legislature was thinking ahead?
We did not, and it's not that we weren't thinking ahead, but in the Act 42, the Gaming Expansion Act that passed in October of last year, remember, there were 6 items that we could do. The 6th item being sports gaming, if something happened federally, and as you said, it did. We have satellite casinos, or what people call the mini casinos that we've auctioned off. There's 5 of them. We have internet gaming. We have VGTs, or video gaming terminals, at truck stops. We have airport gaming at about 15 airports in Pennsylvania, and we have fantasy contests. So it's not as if we weren't doing anything. We have those 5 things that we're literally going through this same process of drafting regulations, getting input from the legislature, making sure that that was their intent, getting industry meetings to make sure. This is, gaming is very complicated, and the mission of the Gaming Control Board is really just 2 things: to make sure our facilities are safe and that gaming is fair. So we could hurry through this process, but we would probably make a mistake. We want to make sure that this sports wagering is fair.
So the legislation that was approved envisioned sports betting at existing casinos have to pay $10 million up front, tax with an additional 2% tax for something else, I forget what.
Economic development throughout the Commonwealth.
Okay, so it's not like you're going to be able to walk into your local bar and legally bet on the Steelers.
That is correct. However, if any of these gaming entities also purchase the online gaming, the iGaming application, again for $10 million through the Gaming Board, you theoretically could be sitting at a bar with your phone or your iPad, and you could then place wagers through that phone, through that iGaming with, for example, Rivers Casino. So it'll allow for both in person, as long as you're in Pennsylvania, you're standing in Pennsylvania, you can either do it in the brick and mortar casino or you can online through that application that they have available for you.
That's interesting. So that's an additional 10 million.
That's exactly right, yeah.
Well, that's what it's going to be about, right? I envision that as being much bigger than people actually going to the Rivers or the Meadows Casino to place a sports bet in person.
I think you're exactly right. I think that's how people envision it going forward.
So people who've been running illegal bookmaking for forever in Western Pennsylvania, they don't like this, right?
Well, I think that was probably the intent, is and again, there are numbers all over the board, but it's in the billions with a B, is to try to bring that underground activity above ground and regulate it and tax it. And that's what we're charged with from the legislature now, not only on this sports, but the 5 other items that I mentioned to you.
So is there additional enforcement revenue earmarked for as part of the money coming in from the taxes?
The tax revenue that comes in, the 34% will go into our general fund. The 2% will go into a statewide economic development fund as it relates to the Gaming Control Board's operations. There's also back charging to the casinos to help them, assist them in doing the enforcement, for example, with the state police who are on these locations. The structure of the infrastructure of the online gaming and the infrastructure of the facilities are going to be things that will be or the Gaming Control Board.
And if you asked, our biggest challenge amongst a million different things is recognizing that the Gaming Board has about 300 people, and we actually want to get all these 6 items right and not hurry through it. But we don't take any tax dollars from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We're paid out of funds that come from the facilities themselves. So we have to be, we need to recognize that a facility may be paying for staff to enforce and draft regulations geared towards sports wagering, but they may not have that facility at that or that particular piece of gambling at that facility. So we really have to be mindful of, we don't want to gear up staff because it does come from again, not the Commonwealth, it comes from the casinos and the 12 or so other facilities across the Commonwealth.
I noticed that Senator Bill Bradley, the great New York Knicks player, hates this. He said, this is a slippery slope. Next thing you know, you're going to be betting on high school sports. Now, you're in the business to make this work, but the people who have objections to this, how are you going to answer that this is just another commodification of...
Well, in terms of the Pennsylvania Gaming Board, and that's all I can answer for, is we regulate. The legislature obviously legislates. So they give us parameters, and we're going to make this as safe as we can in the facilities, and we're going to make it as fair as we can in the facilities. And then again, it's like anything else. There are people who drive too fast, there's people who text, there's people that eat too much, and there's help for those people, and we take a portion of the revenue that comes in from all these facilities, and whether it's table games or slots, and we have, gambling help for people.
I realize the point he's raising is not what you're in exactly, but he says that athletes will just become just cogs in the wheel, even more than they are now. That it's kind of a sad day for sports. Could you imagine high school sports being bet upon?
Well, I think we did cover that. We prohibited that. We only look at this point in time. But I have to say that there's a lot of support, what I see out there, for folks who wanted us to go down this path. As we went forward. I think you'll see a number of these states also ramping up very quickly and taking advantage of it as a state perspective, particularly for the resources that come in. But I do think that in terms of what we did, we limited it to the NCAA level. And while gaming at these levels, whether it be the NCAA level or a professional level, the ability to have gaming there is only part of some, I think, the concerns that folks have about how we've exploited our sports programs, particularly at the collegiate level as well. So, yeah.
From a public policy standpoint, would you been able to have passed this the way that you did as part of an overall gambling expansion if it weren't for this constant drumbeat of we're broke, we're this many billions of dollars in debt, and it makes opposition to gambling seem almost small and insignificant in relation to this huge fiscal solution that we're coming up with?
I would say to you, part of what we did last year was driven in part by the need for revenue, but that's not the only reason. I think that there's been a lot of folks who have been pushing for this online gaming. The VGTs is a major issue that's been we discussed in Harrisburg. When you look at the iLottery, the lottery program we have in Pennsylvania, had we not done the iLottery at some point, we would have probably been below water with respect to our lottery program. We were not trending up, we were trending down. And had we not made changes and expanded the scope of what lottery can do, for example, introducing Keno to our bars and restaurants and other places, those type of games adding to our lottery fund are going to be what sustains the lottery program as we go forward into the future. And then also capturing those folks who do game on the internet and in that space, so to speak. Have we done iGaming or have we done sports betting only and not done iLottery with that, we would have really been in trouble with respect to that, because we needed to capture that folks in that space who use their electronic devices to do some of their wagering or do some of their betting on daily numbers and the like.
And remember, I mean, there's an economic development component to this, right or wrong. I mean, there's 17,000 roughly people, Pennsylvanians, who work in our casinos right now. About $1.4 billion gets generated. The majority of that goes to property tax relief. So it's not going to the general fund, the money that comes from slots and tables. $1.4 billion for property tax relief, and it's about a $6 or $7 billion industry in Pennsylvania. You know, right across the street in Rivers is about 2,000 employees. Again, for right or wrong, those are people who work there and make a good, decent living. And some of these mini casinos we hear, 250, 300 people will be working at them, and throughout, as I said, those 6 gaming categories, you have hundreds and hundreds of people.
We need to take a break, but before we do, Senator Costa, have you heard from the industry that this 36% tax is way too high?
Yeah, yes.
At West Virginia, for instance, I think is going to be at 10%.
It is what it is. They said the same thing when we initially did slot machines, when we put a $50 million price on the license. We had 12 licenses available. Every one of the 12, except for one right now, have been taken. So they're going to complain about it, but at the end of the day, they have a choice. They can decide not to participate in this type of gaming. There'll be 9 or 10 or 11 other entities that would participate here. So, you know, they have complained a little bit, but, you know.
And let's remember, our first auction generated $50 million for the mini casino, not a river-style casino, a mini casino, which is, it's much, much smaller, $50 million. And then the last auction went for $7.5 million, and everything in between. So
not hearing a lot of sympathy for those complaints. All right, we need to take a break. When we continue, we'll be joined by Chuck Berry from Point Park University's Rowland School of Business. Stay with us.